To discover a kindred spirit is to find your heart in the heart of a friend. A quote by Anne Parrish, an American novelist. Hello and welcome to Kindred Spaces. I am Dr. Alyssa Kaying.
And I am Dr. Foua Rhodes.
And we are your host for this podcast, where we hope that you can laugh with us, cry with us, be vulnerable with us, and connect with us.
We're so glad you could join us for our first podcast.
Yes.
This is exciting. This has been a long journey to even get to this first podcast.
For sure. Because I remember when we first met, that was many years ago.
Maybe like 25 at least, right?
Probably. But
yeah.
You know, the interesting thing is that even before you and I had that phone conversation when I was going to get married and I was seeking advice from you as strangers, I had known about you already because your older sister, I grew up with her, and she would always tell me, you remind me so much of my sister. You and my sister should connect. And she would tell me this, and this is when we were in high school, right? And we didn't meet until after graduate school.
Right. Yeah, and I had heard your name, and did you get my number from my sister?
I think so. I don't know. That was so long ago.
Yeah, because when you called, I wasn't surprised, and I was, I don't know if I had been told that you were going to call, but regardless, we connected over the phone. Back in the days, there were no cell phones.
Right.
Landline, you got my number, you called me.
Right.
I was living in Southern California.
Oh, that's right. No, it was you that called because you were going to move to Minnesota for graduate school.
That's right. Okay. See, somehow
we connected.
Yes.
And the conversation just clicked, and we've been friends since. And every time we talk, we just talk about everything and anything. And so over the years, especially as our friendship grew, and especially as technology advanced and social media presence and podcasts and all of that, then we just started talking about, it'd be great if we could do a podcast.
Yeah, and every time that we get together, I wish we had just pressed record.
Right.
So that people could be in on our conversation. Not so much that they're amazing conversations, but just so real.
Right.
And knowing that we are able to create a space for real conversations.
Well, and I think for me, what really prompted this to happen after so many years of talking about it, mentioning it in passing, talking to other friends about it, was the passing of my dad. And I think that was my first really big event that kind of just was jarring to my system in terms of coping, in terms of reflective moments, in terms of grief, loss. And in that moment, I realized that my career, while I had been focusing on helping others, on mental health, while you and I had great conversations through the years, that in that moment it just became more solidified. Like, I need more girlfriend time. I need more self-nurturing time. I need more therapeutic time. And I remember reaching out to you, and I remember saying, we really need to get this podcast going because this podcast is more for me. It's not for the public. It's not for the clients. It's not for the mental health gaps out there. It's really just for me, and having kindred spaces or kindred conversations or being with kindred spirits was what I needed in that moment when my dad passed. And so for me, that was the moment where I was just like, we just got to do it. And you may be in your own journey at that point because you were like, yeah, let's do it.
Well, my recollection of our conversations through the years has been that I could tell you things about my marriage that I might not have been able to just talk about with other people. And knowing that I wasn't the only one struggling, but you certainly provided a listening ear and a place where I could process things. And I knew that you were always on my side. But from the very beginning, you have been a truth teller to me. So our very first phone conversation, whether you called me or I called you, was that I just opened up to you about how at that point I had been married almost 7 years.
I remember
and it was a very rough beginning for me. And so I was telling you, here's what's happening and here's what my husband's doing. And then you said, can I be honest with you, Bafua? I think it's your fault. And
I really? Oh man,
did.
I am so not a good friend.
No, you were the first person to like tell the truth. And it was jarring, and then I had to stop. And that was the beginning of me, like my journey, my like kind of a turning point for me. And I was just like, okay, if she's willing to tell me that, then I need to take a look at my part in contributing to my marriage being so destructive and detrimental. And that really was the turning point. So when I think about you, that's what I remember as that was my first encounter with Kaying.
Oh man, and I don't know if I should be proud of that. What I remember from those conversations in those early years was your wisdom. Because I think in sharing about your marriage, you were normalizing the rough 3 to 7 years. I remember you calling the 7-year itch, and the first 3 years were the roughest. And to me, our friendship was so special because you helped normalize that. And I was like, okay, if this person that I believe is truly a good person, a good human being, who loves so deeply, is struggling with her marriage with a man that I think is truly a good man, then this must be okay for us to be going through these struggles. So that's what I remember.
Wow. Hey, it was a marriage made in heaven almost, yours and mine. A friendship certainly based on truth.
Right.
And I think that's something that I appreciate as we launch this podcast, is that we're going to tell some hard truths and be in the trenches with people, because we've been there, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the hard parts about being a professional, being a public figure in a sense in the community, in the Hmong community, is people just think I have the perfect marriage, the perfect life, and when I try to tell them no, I mean it like pull back the cover and you'll see it's very normal, the heartaches, the trying again, the having to apologize. It may not come across that way to people because they only see the polished persona. And so this space, this Kindred space, is for people who want to be real and who aren't afraid to kind of dig deep. And that's what I appreciate about our friendship, is that we don't hide from each other. That we don't just call it out when we see it in the other person, but it's a safe place to just open up and say, hey, I think this is happening inside of me, right? So,
yeah. Well, I think also in addition to that, right, the Kindred Spaces, this podcast is really to have those conversations with people that you can connect at that level with. Because, I mean, we're all very different and we all gravitate towards different people, but we have to find our people. And when we find our people, we can have these conversations that can go on for hours naturally. And that's what happens with you and I, is that when we get together, there was one time we got together to do a writer's retreat. And we just talked for like hours.
Right. Hey, you got a chapter done.
Yes, but I finally had to say, we can't have these writers retreat because we're not productive. But I think that's what, kindred spirits are, is that you can really just talk about anything and be real and be vulnerable, be raw, but also understand each other's soul. And I think that's really important. I think that most human beings long for that. It's just that we may not find those people, or maybe we're still working on ourselves, or whatever it is. And so my hope for this podcast is to invite others, and including you and I, to have these conversations that matters to our soul, that really helps us to grow in the way that we want to grow, while having people who have grace for themselves, but also for us as friends.
Right.
That even you had a lot of grace for me when I called you out, and that's, most people would say that's not being a very good friend, but maybe you and I connected at a level where you just saw that as well intended, not rude, not abrasive, but really just well intended. And that's what being in kindred spaces is that the other person that you're showing up for doesn't interpret it in the bad, but can see the good in you.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think too that when we get to the space where we can say there's actually no topic that this person will find off-putting or shocking in a way that they don't want to deal with it. And so kindred spaces are necessary because there are spaces inside of us that we might not show anyone else.
Right.
But I think for me, like in that telephone conversation, was that you shone the light in places in my life that I wasn't willing to see, but was ready. And so that too is part of being in a kindred space, is to say, hey, I'm a sojourner with you. I'm not better than you or no more. I'm on this journey with you, but I may not have the blind spots you do. And so let me help you see some things. And I hope that you can help me see some things that I'm blind to. And we need places like that. We need people like that in our lives who gently but truthfully shine the light in dark places that we don't want people to know about.
For sure. And that was 1999, I thought. Was it?
I think so.
25 years.
Yeah, because did you get married in 2020 or 2021?
2001.
Oh, sorry. That was the 2001, not 2000.
Not 2021.
That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
So you and I met 2001, not 2021.
Or we chatted in 2000, right before, or maybe, because I remember I was in Minnesota and I moved in 1999.
Okay.
And you were going to move up. I don't know when you moved
I moved up to the Twin Cities in 2001.
So maybe in 2000 was when we met. And I think we had a lot in common too, because not only are we from the same generation, but we were also of the generation that went to college. The very few percentage that went to college as single Hmong daughters, and we went to college far away from home. And I think there was some kindred bond in that, where I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg, if we are like-minded and that's why we were on that path, or because we were on that path we connected.
Right. Well, my sister saw something in you that reminded her of me.
School.
Yes. If I were to ask her, she'd probably say, well, you're both opinionated, independent, educated, strong-willed, knew what you wanted to do. I think those were the qualities so maybe that's the egg, right? That gave birth to two young ladies who went off to college. And so what influenced you to even think about college back in the late 80s?
Yeah, so before I answer that, I think one of the intentional point of kindred spaces, right, is to delve deeper into who we are as, because this is my passion, I'm assuming it's yours too, as Hmong women, as Hmong daughters, that we are really going to delve into our journey, right? Topics that most people might not want to talk about. Topics that you and I are used to talking about because we're both mental health professionals. But now we're bringing in our personal lens into it because, number one, we are Hmong daughters. We are a wife, we are a friend, we are a spouse, we are a sister. And so we bring into this space who we are as Hmong women of our generation. And so that's why in this first podcast, we really want to talk about who we are so that listeners can understand our journey as well too, and hopefully can connect to us where we are, even if they're not from our generation. But you're right, back in the days, I mean, that was, now we're dating ourselves, but that's really how we're showing up here on this podcast, is who we are. That was 1989 when I graduated from high school. And
yeah, we graduated the same year.
Okay, 89 for you as well.
Went off to college that fall.
Graduated 93.
Yes.
Okay, so we were two individuals on a similar path, not knowing who we were, and it was a very lonely path. I don't know if you would consider yours lonely. I know you had some colleagues at your school too that were Hmong. I had some as well too, and but I think just from high school to college seemed like a very lonely journey. And it wasn't until you got to college that you met up with other people that found themselves at college too. But I think for me, I grew up with this seed that was planted about my father having been educated in his clan. And so somehow, even as I remember, this is, I don't know if I fabricated this, but I remember when we were going to come to the United States, and they had told us, and I think I might have been 6 or 7 at the time. And I just remember standing outside of housing, and I remember looking up in the dark skies and thinking, I'm going to the country or a land where education is possible. Wow. And I'm going to make something of myself. Like, I remember that, just looking into this dark skies, partly because my dad was educated. And so I grew up with everybody kind of just saying, all this stuff. And so that was planted in me. And then when I came to America and I went to school came easily to me. So then it was just something that was impressed in my heart.
Was there any distinction between, well, you're a girl, you shouldn't even think about being educated? Or did you get the impression that it didn't matter what your gender?
That's a really good question. And I thought it didn't matter because my parents they're not one to have a lot of conversations with me. They love me. They will talk to me when they see that I'm doing something that's not, pleasing, or that would bring, dishonor to our family. But for the most part, it wasn't a lot of, so in many ways, I didn't have that conversation growing up. So I just thought that there were no barriers, that I was just as valued and had the same opportunity as any daughter or son. And my extended family didn't say much to me either. It wasn't until I went off to college, where I wanted to go to college, that then the gender role expectations came into place, where my parents were like, so that was when those conversations came. But I was already determined, and I already said, I already said yes, so I'm going. So I was very stubborn in that way, that or maybe strong-willed in that way, that I was like, no matter what, I'm gonna go. But that was when my parents said, well, if you're gonna go, then you need to not make us lose face. So I would imagine if I was a boy, I don't think there would have been that pushback.
Yeah, but I think even that is not the norm, right? In our generation, that even a girl going through 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 6th grade, that there would be the same kind of support for your educational attainments.
Yeah. What about you? I know you had, because I had one brother. You have many brothers who are older than you. And going off to college, I mean, you went to Brown, which is states away. I went to UCSB, which is just 4 hours away driving, right? Like, what was your experience?
Yeah, so my father didn't get to go to school when he was in Laos, and that was probably one of his biggest regrets, because he's kind of a scholar. He loves to read. I always, when I think about him, he's sitting there with his Bible open in front of him reading. So reading, education, all of that is, I just grew up seeing that. And my father was one of the Hmong parents who was willing to send his oldest son to the big city to be educated. And my uncles did that with their sons as well. So I think education was, in my extended family, a very high value. They knew that education was the way to get us out of poverty. So from day one, my dad had always stressed education for all of us. I am the fifth child of 7 and one of 2 girls. So we have a lot of boys in my family. My oldest brother was educated in Laos, and then when we came to the US, he went to college. So that was just kind of the trajectory that I knew I was on, because my dad stressed education.
And so your dad didn't stress marriage?
Not really. I mean, he assumed I would get married, but that I would also, you know, be educated. I don't think they understood college as much, but I don't think that they ever thought she's not going to go to college, because I excelled academically.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm not even sure how I decided, hey, I'm going to college. It was not a conversation. It was kind of a given. And it might have been because my brother, my older brother, went off to college. He was in college when we came over.
Did he go to college in town, or did he go out of state?
I lived in a small town in Iowa, and there was a college actually just a couple blocks from our house. So when we arrived, he was already in college.
I see. Okay.
And then the brother, who's just older than me, he went off to college when he finished high school. So it was just a matter of, hey.
So they sort of paved the way for you.
Yes,
okay.
they did.
So when you said you were going to go to a different state, how was that received?
They were fine. I mean, even my junior year when I was visiting colleges, they supported that. I just got in the car and said, hey, I'm going to Milwaukee to visit Marquette. And they were like, here's gas money. So.
It's interesting how our parents and our surrounding family can play such a big role in the path that we're on, right? I mean, it sounds like your parents didn't push marriage. My parents didn't push marriage either. You know, my parents, while they discouraged me from going so far away and really, you know, impressed into me the importance of not acting in ways that would bring them dishonor, they didn't say, don't go to college, don't go to school. I almost wonder if they were really hard pressed, like some parents who are like, I mean, of course I grew up with that kind of narrative around me, but my parents never said those things to me. And so it's interesting how our parents are so critically important in the journey that we're on, because it sounds like your parents were supportive. My parents were supportive in their own way as well too, which allowed us to do what we did.
Yeah, so I think parents could either play a active role in supporting you to pursue higher education, or play a very passive role, but not put barriers in the way. And then there are some parents who actually put barriers in the way. And I would say that I received support, and like verbal and financial and time. I mean, I remember when I would stay up late at night and my parents wouldn't say anything because I'd be studying. I did not grow up cooking.
Nor did I.
And cleaning, because I was always studying. And my parents, they encouraged that.
Yeah.
And so it was not typical. I understood that it wasn't typical. So I think I am indebted to my parents for actively supporting me to pursue education. And I knew that even if I got married, because it wasn't like I didn't date when I was in high school, I knew that it would have to be a man who allowed me to go to college even if we were married, and that his family would have to support it. So in many ways it was just kind of expected. I expected that would be my journey.
I almost wonder if there has to be some element of self-awareness too, that kind of led us to this path that was not the typical path that a lot of our peers, a lot of our same age female peers were on. Because while you knew that if you got married, he would support education, I knew that I needed to do it single. Like I knew that marriage, because I knew enough about myself that I would have to throw away all of those dreams, because then I would fall into so that I would be tied down, excuse the phrase, but that would be how I felt. That was how I felt. I would be tied down to the nya duties, and it would prevent me from living out this other dream. So for me, I knew I had to do this.
Where do you think you got that narrative from, or that understanding?
I don't know. That's why I said there has to be some hard wiring. Because my parents, to your point earlier, which you framed really well, was there's some parents that might not support you, but also may not put barriers. And so my parents, it's not that they didn't support me. Like my mom, she would drop me off at school if I had extracurricular activities. So she supported me in those ways, but never in words. Like, it's just like, Mom, can you drop me off at school? I have an activity. Okay, right? So she supported me in that way. Or not cooking and having to do, just to look at my schoolwork. She wouldn't say, she wouldn't say that, but she wouldn't also say, she would just let me do whatever I need to do. So yes, my parents supported me passively, and they didn't put barriers. And so I don't know where I got those convictions from, but I know I'm also a person that has very deep convictions at a very young age, and I don't know where I got that from.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Well, our growing up experiences are different too, because I grew up in a small town in Iowa. We were, like, you could count the number of minorities, non-whites. Well, okay, maybe there were a dozen of us families. And so my whole exterior or external locus of control, if you want to call it that, was very different than being in a, like, steeped in a Hmong community.
Okay.
So I think that too allowed me to just dream differently, think different, and have different expectations. It's not like I didn't see friends and cousins who got married young and then they had to give up their aspirations. I often say that I have several friends and cousins who are way smarter than I, much more capable, but they got married young, and it curtailed their formal education. So it's not like I didn't see those examples, but I was like, hey, even if I get married, I'm going to college, because that's my career is going to depend on that. And
wow, you are very wise.
No, I was, okay, so the reality is that I was driven the same way my dad was.
I see.
He knew that education was the way to get out of poverty. And I went to college so that I could get a good career, so that I could support my parents. That was my thinking at the time. Little did I know that it was my parents who would be supporting me for years.
That is so interesting, because I don't think my journey was that well thought through. I grew up in a very tight-knit Hmong community in California, and so of course everybody was getting married, right? But I think I had always embraced academic achievement as one of my strengths. I was not good at sports, there were a few things that I was good at, and school was the only thing that I was really good at. And for some reason, guys just weren't something that I was interested in either. And so this is a very surface level conviction that led me down this path was, well, I don't want to get married, and I don't want to be called an old maid, and I don't want to be called, a bad name. So I'm going to go to school. So if I go to school, then people can't say she's not doing anything. People can just say, "Oh, she's going to school. That's why she's not getting married." It was that surface level.
Hey, I mean, we have to have something that that kind of shapes the path.
Right.
And,
right.
Yeah.
But I think even at that surface level, I also knew that I didn't want to go with the flow, do what everybody was doing, if it didn't feel right for me. Right? So if I didn't meet the love of my life, I'm not going to get married just for the sake of getting married because everybody else is getting married.
And that's a whole other topic we'll cover in a later podcast.
Right, because it was just like, I'm not going to just do it because everybody's doing it either. It has to feel right for me. And maybe that's what kept me on this path, was the other option that everybody was doing is not for me. Because I want to marry for love. I don't want to marry because I don't want to be called itong low. I don't want to marry because home life sucks. Not that my home life was bad. It wasn't at all. Maybe that's part of the other protective factor too. But that was how I ended up at college, was marriage is not for me.
Wow. Okay. How did you choose your college?
Yeah, that was a blind thing too. So I just wanted to go somewhere fun.
You're not married.
Yes. I don't want to get married. I don't want to go to college close to home. I want to go somewhere where I can see the beach.
Wow.
This is all just a God thing. I feel like my life has been really blessed by God. So
you wanted to go somewhere fun.
Oh, yes, I wanted to go somewhere fun. I don't know what it was. Maybe I just wanted to explore life. I don't know. So UC Santa Barbara just seemed like a beautiful place. I only applied, and somehow I got it in my head that I just wanted to go to UCs. Because in California, the University of California seems to be maybe stronger in their educational I don't know,
they're good
programs.
Schools.
Yes.
Lots of good UCs.
Right. So I applied to UC Davis, I applied to UC Santa Cruz, and I applied to UC Santa Barbara. And I chose UC Santa Barbara because it was beautiful. I don't even think I toured it. I just went blindly.
Wow.
But, my parents were supportive and loving. Once we got over the hump of, this is what you need to do, you have to stay on track, you got to make sure you study. Then they were just on board. They took me down for orientation. They brought me down, when it was the first week of school. My dad even bought care packages during midterms. So in their own way, they did support me and provide that love and try to minimize any barriers. But that was how I chose it.
Yeah, were you the first one in your family to go to college?
So I have 2 older sisters. There's 9 of us, and my 2 older sisters went to college, but they went to college in town. It was a community college. So I was the first one to go to a 4-year college far away from home. Yeah. Okay. So how did you choose Brown?
So I had heard about Brown when I was in high school or growing up because my uncle, who's also very education minded, just said to us, the cousins, if any of you goes to Brown, I will support you through it. That's what he said. I didn't hold him to it, but that's the first time I heard. And then in my junior year, I just started researching, looking at, the best colleges, and I knew I wanted to go away, like far away. So growing up in Iowa, I could go to the East Coast or the West Coast. But most of the Ivies are on the East Coast. So I applied just knowing that, again, remember that I was motivated to make money so that I could give my parents a better life.
Okay.
So I knew that the college that I go to was important. And so I...
Well-researched lady you were.
Yeah, so I applied. I might have applied to a couple schools in-state in Iowa, but everything else was on the East Coast.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you were accepted, did your parents understand the level of accomplishment that you've reached in terms of getting into Brown?
No, not really. They just understood that I was going away to a college that normally would cost this amount, and they, I had a lot of financial aid. We had relatives in Providence, so then they felt a little better that there would be somebody there that they could connect to me with if I needed it. But I think for them, they were just proud that I was going off to college. And they really supported that. Looking back, they had no idea what they were doing. They just trusted me. They trusted that I was my behaviors that they had seen all through high school.
Right, that's all they had to go on.
Yeah, they were just trusting in my good character.
You didn't get the lecture.
No, so I had the most
That's
beautiful
good.
time with my dad before I went off to college. He sat me down. My dad and I are very close. He doesn't treat me like a boy. He actually just treats me like a girl that he is very close to. Because I'm close to both my parents. My dad sat me down, and he knew that I was at the age where I would probably meet somebody. And he said, you're going off to college. You'll probably meet men, young men. I want you to know that you can marry anybody you want as long as he loves God and he loves you.
Wow.
And again, he would come to regret what he said because he didn't put a qualifier behind the
ethnicity.
Right. But that was important for him to convey to me that it was important that I marry somebody who loved God and loved me. He didn't even say love us, which most Hmong parents would say.
Your dad sounds like a very progressive, ahead of his time Hmong man, I should say.
Yeah, he grew up as kind of an orphan. Both his parents died when he was very young, so he had to kind of grow up fast and be independent. He's kind of not really a rebel, but an independent thinker.
Which helped you.
Yes, tremendously.
And I almost wonder, as Hmong daughters, if our relationship with our dad is what also helped build us as individuals in our character. Because as you're talking about your relationship with your dad, my relationship with my dad was not close in that way, but it was close in the fact that I was his first biological child. I have two older sisters, but they're half siblings. And growing up, everyone would tell me, "嗰日讀個字碌輯啦呢，嗰日讀個字錯輯啦呢，然後你個怎麼個嘢個字錯個呢？你上來弟弟咁落個字呀呀好多." So growing up, it was planted in me that I was well loved, that my dad loved me a lot. And so even though we didn't have a conversational, like a deep emotional relationship, like the way you described yours with your dad, there was a strong bond and attachment to my dad, to the point where I remember we were in Omaha in the early 80s, and he would take me to these meetings where it's just all Hmong men. And so in some way, I think I just tagged along, and I don't know, but I remember these rare moments where I would go with him as a daughter to a room full of men to have whatever, to be around them. I don't remember much, but
even that exposure was
so
influential.
So I think it's super important to think about our relationship, right, with our dads as Hmong daughters, and how that really impacted us, and maybe our sense of self, and our belief in our worth. And that's probably another podcast that, that we want to talk about, is how does that really impact us? Because as mental health professionals, we're probably going to bring in some of our insight into some of these conversations. And I also wanted to say that sadly, both of our fathers passed away last year.
Yes, I mean, just 6 months apart.
Yeah.
I think that when I think about my going off to college, probably the saddest moment, and it wasn't sad for me then because it was normal, but looking back. So when I graduated from high school, my dad didn't come to graduation because he was working. And it did not occur to any of us to say for him to get just the night off, right?
Yes.
When I think back to it, I was like, why did we not ask for that time off? And I think for my dad, it was like he worked hard so I could go to college. Even though they didn't have to pay much, they still wanted enough money that that I didn't starve, that I could actually, do my laundry. By the way, I did laundry for the first time when I went off to college because I had to learn to survive. But my dad's idea was if I work hard, my kids can go to college and I can support them financially.
Even at the sacrifice of not going to my daughter's graduation because I was doing something important to getting her where she wants to go. And the sacrifices they make, and like you said, not giving ourselves permission because we came from a different mindset of struggles to where now that we have this opportunity to really work hard, we're going to keep at it, right?
And my parents didn't come to my college graduation. And some of it is, I was halfway across the country. And rather than buying an airplane ticket from Iowa to Rhode Island, they would rather send me the money if they had it.
That is so interesting how we internalize love. Because while you felt like your parents loved you and they gave you lots of words of encouragement and they financially supported you, they didn't go to your graduations, and that's okay because you understood it. My parents, even though they didn't give me the talk about education and love and all of that, they showed their love in a different way. My dad came to all of my graduations. Isn't that so interesting how, because not every parent loves the same way, but the most important piece of this is how do we internalize that? Which I think is super powerful to our sense of self and to our well-being, is that if we internalize it in a positive light, focusing on moments of gratitude, then I think it only nurtures our soul and helps us to be more grounded.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was involved in sports in high school, and my parents never saw a single game. No, I was, president of our National Honor Society. We had dinner. I didn't invite my parents because I knew they wouldn't come, and there was no hard feelings about that. It was things. Their love language was very different, right?
And you understood.
Yeah, it was hard work. It was words of affirmation.
Yeah.
It was helping me financially as best as they could.
But we also grew up in a different time where we understood Hmong culture. We understood our parents' sacrifices, and we understood what love meant. And so we didn't read too much into that. And I think that's why Kindred Spaces to me is so special, because we get to talk about the different generation, or maybe not the different generations, but different phases of our lives, to where now we're in our 50s, and to be able to reflect back on our journey, to be able to talk about how unique our generation is from others, where we are truly bicultural and truly bilingual, and we understand a time when being Hmong, what it was like, the beautiful piece about what being Hmong was like, right? The true collective piece of it, and we understand what it's like to be American. And so I'm looking forward to really integrating all of that into this podcast that we're going to be talking about. But I know we're running out of time. I don't know if you have any other things to talk about. We want to keep it short so that people don't get bored, right?
Right. Well, one of my hopes for Kindred Spaces is that our conversation would spark other conversations in similar veins. I mean, just to say, hey, what was your relationship like with your dad? And was your dad supportive of your education? And I don't know what the answer will be. I mean, it'll be different for each of you, but even to be able to reflect on that with close friends and to honor each other in our journey, and in many ways also honor our roots, right? And I don't want this to be a place where we romanticize our Hmong culture, but I also don't want it to be a place where we just bash on our Hmong culture, right? And it needs to be that truth speaking with love, right?
I love that.
And honor and respect. But just even our first podcast here, I hope that it's been helpful for you to get to know Kaying and myself, as well as to just spark some interest in your own story and in your friendships and conversations you can have in your own kindred spaces.
Yes, so thank you for joining us for this first podcast, and we're really excited for our second podcast, which we're going to record today too. So Foua and I have decided we're both, I think our personalities were very planful, but we decided that at our older, wiser age, we're just going to be spontaneous. So being transparent here, thank you for joining us for our first podcast. And now we're going to transition into our second podcast because we have a guest here who is one of our dear friends as well. And that's our second podcast. So we hope you will join us. Yes.